Hello and welcome to Radical Exchanges. Today's episode is an illuminating discussion on the cutting edge of community building and social innovation. Matt Prewitt is joined by Janine and Timour Kosters, the founders of Edge City, to explore the fascinating world of pop-up cities and villages. They start by discussing their recent experiences at Edge Esmeralda, one of Edge City's experimental most recent pop-up villages. This leads them on a deep dive into the concept of pop-up communities and their potential to reshape society. They map out some of the historical precedents for these experiments and go on to describe just how Edge City is creating spaces for technological and social innovation through exploring intriguing initiatives like community currencies. Whether you're interested in the future of cities, alternative communities, or cutting-edge social technologies, this conversation offers a glimpse into a movement that could transform our approach to community and collaboration. And now, here is Matt Prewitt, Janine and Timour Kosters.
All right, I'm here with Timour Kosters and Janine the founders of Edge City. Thank you for joining me. Excited to talk to you both.
Thanks for having us, Matt.
Good to be here.
So I have just spent much of the last month at Edge Esmeralda, and I know you have too. You're at the end of running an extremely complex, very successful marathon event. And maybe it's a little soon to reflect, but I would love to hear your thoughts on both how Edge Esmeralda has gone and sort of like what it is, and maybe we can go from there into situating it within the larger context of the pop-up cities movement.
Yeah, for sure. Maybe we'll start with what it is, and then we can chat about how it's been for the last month. So at Edge City, we convene folks who are working at the frontiers of tech, science, and society in what we call pop-up villages, which are essentially, we gather groups of 300 people and we live together, we work together, we create an environment for experimentation and collaboration. They usually last between 1 and 2 months. And the folks that we bring, we look for folks who are curious, kind of pushing the frontiers of the fields that they work in. And the environment is built around experimentation and really with a focus on co-creation and building and shipping interesting products or technologies. Did I miss anything?
Yeah, in addition to that, I think 2 areas that we have been focused on as goals for what we're building is healthier environments for people to live. So actually both healthier environments from how people are interacting with one another, living in close proximity, spending time with others and trying to combat sort of the loneliness epidemic, while at the same time eating healthier meals, spending time outside, actually getting workouts in the morning, more encouraging just healthier lifestyles as a whole. The other aspect is who we're bringing in, not just thinking about people in these areas between the ages of 19 to 25, but actually thinking about multi-generational families. We've got a number of families that have been part of this first iteration. And the idea is to continue pushing that, because if we're expecting people to be with us or to be together for a month to 2 months at a time, that's almost, a 6th or 12th of their year, and spending that away from families or in these environments that don't necessarily cultivate the idea of a real village versus just another university campus, defeats the purpose of shifting and experimenting with new cultural norms.
So having experienced it, it makes perfect sense to me, and I'm sure you've noticed something as well, which is that when you try to describe it to people who are a little bit sort of a notch or two away in the social network, it can be hard to categorize it. I think the way that I have started to situate it when I try to describe it to my parents, for example, is that there's a new cultural phenomenon called pop-up cities, right? I would love to hear from you, like what you think this phenomenon is and where it comes from and where it's going. So, maybe we can start with Zuzulu. Like, I know you were both at Zuzulu. Can you tell our audience a little bit about what Zuzulu is, or what impression it made on you, and how that cultural event led to or flowed into what you're working on now?
Of course. So I was one of the co-creators of Zuzulu, and Timour helped with one of the tracks while we were there with AI and crypto. And ultimately, Zuzulu was an experiment that Vitalik Buterin thought up, where the idea of network states had been put out by Biology in his book. Vitalik had been talking about crypto cities for a long time. And there were a few people that were actually experimenting with these sort of intellectual concepts that people were describing. So the idea was like, well, let's just experiment with testing this out and what's like a minimal viable experiment for a new way of living that we can put out. And when you look at things, Biology has this great graph of essentially seeing that like we've done a lot of conferences for many people for short periods of time really well, and we've iterated on that a ton. And then we've iterated on the other side of the spectrum of like universities, cities, states, and what that looks like for long periods of time. But there's this missing area in the middle of experimentation around 2 to 6 month gatherings for 200 to 600 people. And the idea was just like, let's see what an experiment looks like there. And from that, it was an extremely successful time of bringing together a few different disciplines, people from all over the world, and this concept of 2-month period being a timeline that felt like an experiment, but still felt like real life. And ultimately getting to see what happens when you've got people in close proximity, sharing meals every day, learning on a weekly basis about different topics. And how we built it was this idea of like, let's build this as a public good. Community should be a public good. We should have access to learning environments. We should have access to healthy living environments and likes. And with that, we wanted to figure out like, how do you get this to more people? Like, how do we actually create this more into a movement? Where Ethereum, as one example, is able to help further other frontier industries, or you're able to bring together new frontier industries, or just bring together people in general to experiment with new ways of living. So with that idea of like turning it more into a movement, the concept of keeping it as one entity that kept throwing events on a regular basis felt limiting versus trying to spur on and create many different pop-up cities from it. As a result, that's where we sort of were thinking from our end, did we just want to participate with participate in other pop-ups that happened around the world? Or did we have an idea of what we wanted to see grow in the ecosystem and put that forward? And Edge City as a whole is one of many different pop-up communities that have been tested in the past year, and that is being tested in 2024.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit about my personal experience as well, because I think it illustrates a little bit about why I'm excited, and I think we're both excited about this movement. So for those who don't know, specifically to color in a bit more detail, Zuzulu was a 2-month event. It happened in Montenegro, in a small town by the sea. And we had about 200 people who were living there full time, and probably about 800 visitors over those 2 months. So there was about 1,000 people who came and went throughout that time. And I joined about halfway through. I stayed there for a few weeks. And like Janine said, I was there to help organize the AI track. And the conference was amazing. We had a great time, but I personally ended up having kind of a continuous string of very meaningful experiences in terms of the connections I was making, the experiences I was having. And afterwards, I was reflecting on why that was and what it meant. And I feel like it's something around, it just feels very enlivening to be in an environment surrounded by interesting, curious people who share some semblance of interests and topics, and have it be very multidisciplinary. So I'm able to learn a lot of different things at the same time. I'm also able to express multiple sides of my personality. So there's the side that really likes to get intellectual, but also the side that really likes to deeply connect with people and, form bonds of affinity over just continuous shared experience and shared collaboration. I got to do everything from like cold plunging to DJing to experimenting with new art forms to, hosting panels, etc. So I think those environments are uniquely good for creating bonds between communities, and that has a lot of downstream implications that I think we can get into on this call.
So if I can give you some of my own reflections, I'm curious what you think about it. One of the things that strikes me about the pop-up cities movement is that it's bringing together so many different things. And it's almost hard to define the common thread between all of the different cultural phenomena that it is uniting. But pop-up cities seem to be the thing uniting them in a way. So here are some of the phenomena that I have in mind, right? So one is this sort of like digital nomadism, let's say, right? And kind of like a different sort of relationship with place. So you can imagine basically people creating, and when I look around in certain kind of quadrants of the tech world and so on, it seems to me that there are people, going from thing to thing throughout the year and developing a new relationship with place and creating communities that are a little bit less. They're sort of, not completely placeless, but are a little bit less place grounded than in the past, right? There's like something going on there culturally. And then some other phenomena are, that it's uniting are, let's say, technical innovation, right? So there's, there are people thinking about a handful of different problems in technology. There's people thinking about AI, there's people thinking about crypto, there's people thinking about sort of the frontiers of biology and longevity and things like that. Communities that are interested in and that are at the leading edge of these areas seem to be attracted to this kind of experiment, right? So that's another thing that it's bringing together. And then maybe the third thing, which is sort of like a new kind of urbanism, for example, like in California, for example, there's a lot of people thinking about new ways of setting up cities, walkable cities, all kinds of new ideas about urbanism and trying to fix what is perceived as the dysfunction of cities on the West Coast and all that kind of thing, right? So there's some of that, and sorry, I said it was three, and the fourth thing is like network state, that kind of thing. So this kind of political dimension of organizing. Organizing new kinds of communities that could conceivably perceive themselves or be perceived as political sort of entities, which also, of course, overlaps with a lot of ideas that have been in the crypto sphere for a long time. Now, that's just like that is so many things, and yet when you at one of these pop-up city or pop-up village events, you can feel them all there. You can feel all these things sort of swirling around each other. And so I wonder if you can say like where you think that this cultural phenomenon is going. Like, do you think that, with the benefit of hindsight or after it's developed for a few more years, do you think it will crystallize in terms of a focus on one of these directions more than another? Or do you also perceive this kind of openness to the direction? Would love your thoughts about that.
Great question. And good sort of points around just how many different directions it can go. And I think it's something where, like, from our standpoint, or at least how I'm looking at it, is like we're in the earliest stages of this concept and these ideas and perspectives. And there's a lot of theory that has been pulled together around what it all can be. But sort of there's the running joke around, someone who's trying to build a network state who hasn't thrown a dinner party. And it's how I see it is like we sort of have to start small and grow and be comfortable with recognizing that, like, creating place, creating culture, and creating sort of like totally new ways of sort of social norms and, in a way, social technology takes time. And I think a lot of the people who have been thinking about these concepts are coming from the tech world that moves a lot faster than those in the physical world. And as you can see, like, we're calling Edge City, building pop-up villages right now, because that actually describes what the thing is. And what we found with Zuzulu was a lot of people were like, well, this wasn't a pop-up city. This was like much smaller than that. And the sense of scale was somewhat off. And I think there's a real value in being able to build and share language of where we are in the different stages of growth. So right now, it's very much so these pop-up villages, those could grow and feel more like a pop-up city, or it could feel like how we're thinking about it is like if we have many pop-up villages around the world that almost make up a city in different places. So it's this like network of villages that we have. And this concept of seeding new cities. So one thing that, we've done here is Edge City has partnered with Esmeralda, which is going to be a full-time village that might become a town that might grow. So there's the idea of a pop-up village actually seeding a full-time space and recognizing that that'll take 10 to 15 years. And that's not going to take a year to build that physical, new permanent space. They'll take a long time, in building the culture that could seed it is valuable. And I think it's similar with network states, like the concept of actually creating new nation states. And step one is like, can we actually bring a group of people who want to be spending time together and living in a different way together, that like even just seed the idea of like this is feasible before us moving towards anything at that scale.
Yeah, I think something we've noticed is that there is so much value in bringing together this kind of collective energy into one place for a particular period of time that's long enough to still be ambitious and that the stakes are high and people do take it seriously. But it's still, temporary in that people can come, they can experiment, and then they can, take learnings and go back to their real worlds. And so these environments we're starting to see are just perfect places to incubate things like Esmeralda or new physical towns. I think they're also perfect environments to incubate new movements and ways of thinking, new social technologies. So I think if I had to combine all of the 4 points that you made, it's essentially folks who are thinking about what is something new that is interesting for the world. And we just see a lot of value in creating environments for that kind of open exploration and emergence. So emergence is one of the key values and one of our core design principles. We want to create the container and then see what is built within that. A lot of that is, it could be frontier technologies. A lot of folks working at the frontier of tech need these kinds of environments where they can meet peers, they can meet people working in other frontier fields. They can incubate some of their early ideas that might seem bad at first, but every good idea seems bad when it's just starting out, and it needs a bit of that a bit of that care and not to get trampled on too early. And I see that in this new network societies, network nations coordination space. We, to give a specific example, we've been working with Primavera de Filippi to develop her concept of coordinations, which are now, we now refer to them as network nations. And the idea is, like you're saying, can we conceptualize these new types of communities that could over time start to develop some kind of political identity, shared resource management, etc.? Would there be a better place to develop that theory, that actual like line of philosophy, than within a proto network nation itself? And I think that's kind of the thing that we're providing, a experimentation ground. And well, I would actually love to hear from you, Matt, if you're open to sharing a little bit about the experiment that you ran, because this is something that we were very excited to have within the context of Edge Esmeralda. So curious if you want to talk about that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, let me ask one question, and then let's talk a bit about that, because the experiment we ran was a community currency experiment, which we called Edges, where we were testing out a number of ideas that we have worked on relating to basically how to stand up a community currency, how to create a system of value accounting that that works in kind of in a small community, and attempting to sort of solve some of the problems of past community currency efforts. But one thing I want to squeeze in here first is, when you think about the history of pop-up cities, or the sort of prehistory of pop-up cities, a few precedents come to mind for me. I'm curious whether these precedents make sense to you, whether you see important distinctions or would push back on them. What one possible precedent might be the sort of whole earth catalog, back to the land cultural phenomenon. It from the, let's say, 70s. It went beyond that, but was largely in the 70s. You've also got Burning Man, which I've heard named as kind of a precedent for network nations, in particular, in contradistinction to network states, which is another interesting distinction that we may want to double click on or not. And then going back further in history, Michel Bauwens from the P2P Foundation, who's an amazing thinker, who's been in this space for a long time, at a talk at Edge Esmeralda, he brought up the comparison to medieval monasteries after the fall of the Roman Empire, and people sort of clustering into monasteries, starting to build social institutions around those centers of gravity. I thought that was also just an interesting point of comparison for what's going on with pop-up cities. And I'm just curious if you have any reactions or pushback to those comparisons.
I have so many reactions. I love this topic, so we could go on a whole separate part 2 podcast about this. But I mean, very quickly, I think my very kind of amateur historian lens on this is that pretty much at every era of human history, the people at the time have had to respond to the challenges of that time, and therefore have had to form new ways of thinking, new institutions, new ways of governing, community building, etc. And as Michel Bauwens talks about, that often takes the form of something he calls a seed form, which is essentially a group of people going slightly outside of normal society. Not necessarily fully removing themselves, but maybe just taking some time away, or join, the monastery in the medieval ages, like you talked about, and using that as a space for experimentation that then seeds new ideas that can then propagate within the rest of society. And I think this is quite a grand comparison, so I almost hesitate to make it, but I think there's something that rhymes there with what we're doing, where we're not completely removing people, but just for a short space and time, we create an environment for experimentation. That I think that some of the things that can come out of that will, have the capacity to be quite influential. And so a good point of comparison is the Back to the Land movement of the late 60s and 70s, where we're actually quite different in that we're not asking people to completely leave society behind and, go to the farm, join a commune, and that's it. right now, we live in a networked time, so we don't actually have to do that. We all have Wi-Fi. We can go to a place like Healdsburg, develop ideas, and then share those learnings with the world, and take in the input from the outside world as well, where it's relevant. There's also something called the Chautauqua movement.
Do you want to go into it?
Yeah. So something we've learned from Devon, who's our collaborator on Edge Esmeralda, is something that was called the Chautauqua movement, which started in upstate New York in a town called Chautauqua in the 1800s. And it actually became a really profound thing in the US, where pretty much every summer for a couple of months, there would be this public learning festival, essentially, for adults and children. And, university professors would come and give public lectures, etc. And this spread throughout the country, and each town, well, many towns participated, and the ones that did had Chautauquas every summer. And it's actually something that's still going in Chautauqua, New York. And it's something that Devon grew up going to and actually wants to, use as a frame of reference for Esmeralda, her new project. And for me, this was actually quite profound because I realized, wait, there is quite a bit of historical legacy here. And the idea of having, a month a year where people come together to learn from each other, to teach each other the things they've learned throughout the year, I think sounds very compelling. That's definitely a way that I want to live my life. Yeah.
And to add to that, I would say that there's so many moments in history to look at. And I think thinking about genius, which is sort of the idea of scenes of genius, where you're bringing people together and we're seeing accelerated progress. That's a historical reference that we've been looking at. Where has there been these genius hubs? Where have they existed and why? And there is so much about this sort of close proximity, getting people from different industries to spend time together, having these environments for talks. So it's the English coffee shops, and during sort of what happened in France with the salons, and the idea of these moments of time that brought people together, that had sort of shared learning, shared ideas across different industries. And it really did. You've got these moments that have truly accelerated progress and have had some of the best thinkers and best ideas come out of them. So in a way, some of the historical context that we're looking at is not just specific places, but it's also scenes that have happened within culture.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's amazingly helpful context. I mean, another short thought to share here is I've had some interesting conversations with Barry Through from Gray Area in San Francisco, the art space, and we had an interesting conversation about Burning Man, where both of us said some sort of critical things about it that could get us pretty much canceled by lots of people that we love and respect. But it's okay. I think it's an important point to make, which is that I think from the point of view of San Francisco culture, where Burning Man is super integrated into the heart of lots of things that are happening in San Francisco. There's kind of a point of view from which it hasn't been good for San Francisco's culture in the following way. It kind of sucks energy out. There's so many people who are thinking about what they're going to do at Burning Man all year and putting time and energy and resources to Burning Man that it's cultural things that could be enhancing the Bay Area are instead, going up in flames and dust in the Nevada desert, and that's it. I think that there's one metaphorical way that I sometimes think about it is you've got sort of water and earth elements and fire and air elements, and Burning Man is all fire and air. It's all temporary, fast, generative, ideational. It's not really reweaving community in place as much as it might be. And I think that one of the things that I love about the pop-up city movements is that it's finding something in between those two, right? It's taking some of that generative fire and air energy and locating it in place partly in this really interesting kind of intermediate way. So I just wanted to sort of put that out there as a framework that occurred to me.
I've actually got some thoughts on that too, and fully agree with it. And sort of goes back to like when I started working on just like communities. Like essentially, I had this real frustration with the temporary like speed at which we spend time together. Like the Monday through Sunday concept of time that we've created, and the idea that work happens Monday through Friday, and then you only had sort of free time Friday evening through Sunday, meant that we've created experiences that are shared on weekends with people. And we've done that for a crazy amount of time. Even though the work environments that we're living in are completely different today than they were when we sort of like were farming, right? Like we needed to make sure we got a certain amount of things done to get us over the line in the spring, summer and fall, so that the winter, like we were safe and had food. But now it's like we're just online the whole time, and it's like the work environment could have shifted, but hasn't shifted as much as I would have expected. And all that to say is we've built social time around these like very temporary amounts of time of typically 48 hours, which to me feels like an insane amount of time to expect people to open up to one another, to like really come up with new ideas and to really like ground it in a meaningful way. So the piece that I was sort of like really all about 7 years ago was this idea of like sustainable communities. How are we supporting sustainable times? And I was like very adamant about not traveling for weekend trips. I would say no to more than 4 weekend trips a year. And the focus was on like at least spending 1 week, if not 1 month, in any given place that I lived, or spend time so that I was actually building versus just participating in what was going on. And then when I sort of flipped that into this concept of like, oh, I could also help build community this way and like promote the idea of like sustainable community versus flash cultures that we build. I had this sort of like view in my head of most people's timeline and their sort of color is gray with these flashes of color on weekends that are just like big splashes that are hard to integrate into daily life. But everyone should have this weave of color in their like life timeline, of ideas, of people around them, of projects, of just like abundance in a sense of purpose and shared experiences. So when sort of shifting towards the work that I was previously doing, which was building sort of full-time cul-de-sac communities and doing that, starting to do that in Austin, the pop-up city idea was this perfect amount of time and experience of, 30, it takes 30 days to build a habit, and at least having 30 days with people has created this a much greater sense of like real place and like sustainable culture that's built and sustainable connections that are built and ideas that can like actually develop and go from just a seedling to a sprout, even if it's not a tree yet. But that idea of then being able to take those concepts back to where you're from versus completely extract them just for the weekend or week-long event that you're doing somewhere is one of the hopes that we have with the pop-up village approach.
Yeah, and I think this points at something really important here, which is something actually that, Matt, you talked about in an essay you wrote. And if listeners haven't read it, I think it's called something like Secret Societies Network, Zuzalu, Burning Man, Network Cities, etc. And it's one of the main things I got from that essay is about the importance of social technologies and alongside the things that we normally think of as technology, like software and hardware, etc. And I think we firmly believe and agree with you that we need to be spending as much time developing the social technologies that govern the way that we live and the way that we build community as we do on the other things. And that can be simple things like the norms and the practices in our communities, the way that we structure our weeks, the way that we structure shared meals every evening. And to Janine's point, and I've actually thought about it this way, but if it does take 30 days to form a habit, or it's like 27 or something, then this is actually like a perfect amount of time to be able to co-create and then develop and then have those things stick, actually, that then people can integrate them into their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe that's a good segue into to talk about edges, which is another sort of cultural. It's a social technology. It's an experiment in, and it's an experiment in basically creating a form of money that is a little bit more grounded, a little bit more rooted, right? Like, so you can think of sometimes picking up on that earlier metaphor of kind of fire and air versus water and earth. I think of money as very much the great vaporizer, right? It kind of sucks everything up into the air. Like, the old Karl Marx quote often plays in my mind was, everything solid melts into air, right? When we turn things into money or we turn things into capital, there's a way in which that kind of pushes apart the usual ties of community and relation, and yet we really can't do without it. We have no idea how to build a society without money and exchange and capital, right? So what Radical Exchange is trying to do with its community currency work, and Edge Esmeralda was like an amazing place for us to experiment with this and learn more about how to do it, is we're trying to build community currencies that people don't think of as a financial asset, basically, right? We're trying to build community currencies that are able to hold energy and exchange in a community, enable people to have something of value that they can easily exchange without thinking of it completely as a speculative asset.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot to say about it, and I'm happy to sort of share some thoughts about what we learned about the details of the experiment or what we learned at Edge Esmeralda. But I'm also curious, if any reflections you have about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're pointing at something really interesting. Like, I'm definitely not a monetary theorist, but I do intuitively understand why, when value is created in the community, if it's denominated in fiat, that makes it easy for that value to be taken out of the community, because the incentive is just to go spend it on any number of other things in the world. So this is kind of. Yeah, this is why this kind of experiment's interesting to us, and we want to be a place where some of these kind of frontier ideas can be experimented with, especially if it's something that fits within a context of, let's say, there's 300 people here at any one time. There's, again, probably going to be about 1,000 that came in through the doors during the month. What is that a good container for? I think this is an example of something that's actually perfect. So from my perspective, it was really cool just to see how engaged people got, how excited. You never really know. Again, emergence. You never really know what's going to happen when you introduce something like this. And there was like a meme contest. There was a very lively Telegram chat, a bunch of people getting very engaged and having their own ideas about how to use this, people integrating it into their products. And that's the exact kind of thing that we want to see in our spaces.
And on that, I was super excited to see this experiment happen, just because it's the pop-up nature of what we're doing allows for this true sense of playground, where it's okay, if it didn't go well, it didn't go well, but that's fine, it was just a month. And community currencies are it's kind of it could be a pretty crazy thing to adopt at scale, and there's so much complexity to it, but being able to do it in a very sort of stripped down, easy to access environment for play, I think was awesome to see it like take off and not be seen as like this crazy big thing that people have to now be scared of, but something that like people were just like having fun engaging with. And I think new ideas having like a fun element to them are so important. And I actually feel like we're just at the beginning of experimenting with edges. Like I think if anything, this month taught us like how hard it is to even get people to understand what it is and how to engage. And the reminder of like how low friction the onboarding for anything has to be. And I think that's like another, reminder for just like the crypto environment, like more broadly, is just like onboarding is hard, and like low friction onboarding is like the most important thing that we can be working on. So that was just like more of a great place to experiment, and this awesome, like, at least validating side from our end of like, oh, doing a pop-up multiple times over a year, that was like an interesting one of like, do we do that? Do we not? Do we do something once and never again? Do we do something only once a year? It's like, I'm super excited for us to spend the next 3 months being able to sort of go back and forth and like, how can we improve it? Like, what can be, what can be done differently? And like having that concentrated build time for the next couple of months before us going to Thailand and then trying the experiment again at the next Edge City, which is Edge City Lana in October.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I agree with all of that. And though I fully concur that we're just at the beginning of the Edges project, because and I'm there. We learned a lot. There were things that went really well. There were things that could have gone better with the way that Edges was used and the way that people thought about it and engaged with it at Edge Esmeralda. But all of these little things that we learned. Well, actually, let me take a step back and then say what I was going to say. Taking a step back, what we are really trying to do is to get better at the art of making successful community currencies, right? It's not a science. It's actually not even really a technology thing, although it uses technology things. It's basically a kind of a social, cultural happening, to create a successful community currency. And there's no cookbook for it. Most community currencies have failed, but it's the kind of thing that if like as a culture we could get better at it, we could build potentially really interesting pluralistic networks of interacting community currencies that don't eat each other alive, that don't all get sucked into the global market, that don't, wither and die. If we could get good at, striking that balance and creating a pluralistic system of bounded currencies, that could potentially change the world. Now, in order to do that, you need to run social experiments. You need the right kind of social experiment ecosystem, right? You can't just like program tests into your computer and you test it like a program. And similarly, you can't if you just kind of put together a multi-million-dollar one-shot gigantic initiative, that doesn't give you enough reps. I don't know where other than the sort of pop-up city movement, the Edge City ecosystem is I can't even think of where else we would be able to do this iterative learning process of getting better at standing up a community currency system and a local exchange structure. So it's really exciting. I mean, I think that's actually just one example of the kind of experiment that pop-up cities might be able to facilitate in the coming years. And I just find that really exciting. I find it really exciting to imagine that this kind of work could help us get better at, basically not just at I mean, it will accelerate various technical fields as well, I'm sure, but it'll also help us create new contexts for responsible social experimentation and help us improve our institutions.
Yeah, I think you hit on something so true around like it's an art and not a science. Like there's an aspect here where people are like, well, what's the framework? Like you've done this a couple of times. Like there was Zuzulu, there was ZooConnect, now there's Esmeralda. Like it needs to be this open framework that we can share. And it's like we are desperately trying to build that, and at the same time, it feels so much of an art. Like there's just so much that like truly feels like people and place, and just weaving this like very complex system of coordination that like even we don't even fully understand or have seen. But it's this art that can be then played with even more so of like building more art projects into it, that incorporate technology and that incorporate social behaviors and that incorporate just like people's time and energy in some capacity that like are really hard to test out and experiment with in existing systems that are so ingrained and so sort of like tried and tested and hard to like are just these rigid environments for experimentation. So I'm thrilled that you guys were able to actually take advantage of using the space and testing things out, because that's exactly what we want to be seeing.
Super. Well, I think that's a great place to close. I'm grateful for your time, and also just really, really excited about the work that you're doing. Would encourage everybody who's interested in it to dive in and start paying attention to Edge City and other pop-up cities and pop-up villages. I would also urge anyone who's skeptical about it to let down their guard and check it out. Take another look. This is a really, really interesting thing. I have learned a lot and look forward to learning more through working with you all in the future. And thank you.
Thanks
so much, Matt. This is great.
Take care.
All right.
The Radical Exchanges podcast is executive produced by G. Angela Corpus and is co-produced and audio engineered by myself, Aaron Benavides. If you would like to learn more about Radical Exchange, please follow us on Twitter at radxchange or check out our website at radicalexchange.org. And if you'd like to join in the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. So hop on our Discord, where we have channels discussing topics like what you heard today, as well as topics like plural voting, community currencies, soulbound tokens, and more. There will be links to all of these in the description. Have a great day and stay radical.